April 14th, 1943. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Navy cryptographers bent over the decoded Japanese naval transmission. Their fingers traced across typewritten pages, each word more significant than the last. The message had been intercepted just hours earlier, encrypted in the Japanese naval cipher JN-25D. On April 18, SINC Combined Fleet will visit RxZ, R- and RxP in accordance with the following schedule. SINC Combined Fleet. Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself. The message contained what American intelligence had been dreaming of for 18 months, the exact travel itinerary of the man who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor. Departure time, 0600 hours Tokyo time from Rabaul. Arrival, 0745 at Balale Airfield near Bougainville. Aircraft, 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers with 6 Zero fighter escorts. The transmission included precise details that intelligence analysts could hardly believe. Transport via 2 Type 1 medium bombers, escort complement of 6 fighters, exact flight times and routes. Weather contingency plans. Even the admirals planned activities at each base. What the cryptographers didn't know in that fluorescent-lit room was that they had just handed American forces the most audacious assassination opportunity in military history. The architect of Pearl Harbor would soon be within range of American guns for exactly one opportunity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto represented far more than Japanese naval leadership. Born Isoroku Takano in 1884, he had been adopted into the Yamamoto family and rose to become the architect of Japan's Pacific strategy. This was no ordinary military commander, but the embodiment of Japanese naval genius and strategic thinking. This was the man who had studied at Harvard University from 1919 to 1921, the man who had hitchhiked across America, observing Detroit's automobile factories and California's aircraft plants, the man who understood American industrial might better than any Japanese commander. His time in America had convinced him that war with the United States was ultimately unwinnable. When asked by Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoye how war between Japan and America would unfold, Yamamoto had replied with chilling prescience, "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but after that I have utterly no confidence." Yet once committed to war, this reluctant strategist had delivered Pearl Harbor with precise execution. The attack that killed 2,400 Americans and dragged the United States into World War II bore his planning. His strategic mind had crafted the surprise assault that crippled the Pacific Fleet and shocked America into total war. But by April 1943, the tide was turning. The devastating American victory at Midway had cost Japan 4 irreplaceable aircraft carriers and hundreds of experienced pilots. The brutal Guadalcanal campaign had ended in February with complete Japanese evacuation. The myth of Japanese invincibility lay shattered across Pacific battlefields. Yamamoto's inspection tour was designed to congratulate pilots and boost morale after Operation Igo, Japan's recent air offensive that claimed dramatically inflated victories against American forces. Japanese pilots reported sinking 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 25 transports when actual American losses were 1 destroyer, 1 corvette, 1 tanker, and 2 cargo ships. But propaganda required optimism, and Yamamoto would personally deliver congratulations to maintain fighting spirit. American codebreakers had given their military the ultimate target, the one Japanese leader whose death would send shockwaves throughout the Imperial Navy. In the Pacific War, individual Japanese commanders were not just military leaders but symbols. Kill the symbol and shatter morale across an entire fleet. The mission parameters seemed impossible. Yamamoto's flight path would take him 435 miles from the nearest American base at Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. But flying direct would carry the intercepting fighters over Japanese-held islands, bristling with radar installations and observer posts throughout the northern Solomon's chain. The only viable approach required a circuitous route far out to sea, swinging west and south to avoid detection by Japanese coast watchers and radar stations on New Georgia, Vella La Vella, and the Treasury Islands. This indirect path added 165 miles to the journey. Total distance, 600 miles out, 400 miles back. 1,000 miles total in aircraft designed for short-range interception. The mathematics were unforgiving. Only one American fighter possessed the theoretical range for such a mission, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. With its twin Allison V1710 engines and distinctive twin-boom design, the Lightning could carry enough fuel in external drop tanks to theoretically reach the target. But theory and practice were different matters entirely. The P-38G model carried 300 gallons of internal fuel distributed across multiple tanks in the wings and fuselage. For the Yamamoto mission, each aircraft would mount 2 external drop tanks, one carrying 165 gallons, another carrying 300 gallons. Total fuel capacity, 765 gallons maximum. But fuel consumption at cruise power settings would be approximately 45 gallons per hour per engine, with 2 engines burning 90 gallons per hour combined. Flying time available would be approximately 5.5 hours under optimal conditions with no reserves. Mission time required, 4.5 hours minimum, assuming perfect navigation, no combat maneuvering, no headwinds, no mechanical problems, and no delays. The margin for error was essentially 0. A navigation mistake of 1 degree sustained over the distance would put the fighters miles off course with insufficient fuel to search for targets. Unexpected headwinds could leave them swimming in shark-infested waters. Combat maneuvering would drain tanks in minutes. Even perfect execution provided only minutes of fuel reserves for 16 men flying over hostile ocean. Major John William Mitchell commanded the 339th Fighter Squadron of the 347th Fighter Group. At 36 years old, the stocky Mississippian possessed over 2,000 flight hours and a reputation for navigation precision that bordered on supernatural. His squadron pilots trusted his ability to find targets across vast expanses of Pacific Ocean using only compass, clock, and dead reckoning calculations. Mitchell had learned navigation in an era before radio beacons and radar guidance. His methods relied on fundamental skills: precise compass headings, accurate airspeed calculations, careful time monitoring, and intimate knowledge of wind patterns across different altitudes and geographical regions. He could visualize 3-dimensional flight paths in his mind, accounting for magnetic variation, wind drift, and fuel consumption simultaneously. His personal aircraft carried specially synchronized instruments and backup navigation equipment. Multiple compasses provided redundancy against magnetic deviation. His watch was calibrated against Navy time signals. His airspeed indicator had been verified for accuracy across different altitude ranges. Even his seat position had been adjusted to provide optimal visibility of instruments and horizon references. Captain Thomas George Lanphier Jr. represented ambition personified. The 27-year-old son of a decorated World War I aviator, Lanphier flew with aggressive confidence and an eye toward post-war political success. He had already claimed 5 aerial victories, though some remained disputed by fellow pilots and intelligence officers who questioned his combat reports. At 6 feet tall with a commanding presence, Lanphier possessed the charisma and self-promotion instincts that would make him natural squadron leader for the killer flight. His flying style emphasized spectacular maneuvers and aggressive tactics that impressed observers but sometimes endangered wingmen. He understood that aerial combat victories could translate into post-war political capital if properly publicized. His father, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lanphier Sr., had served on General Billy Mitchell's staff during World War I and understood the political dimensions of military aviation. The younger Lanfear had absorbed lessons about publicity and career advancement that would shape his approach to the Yamamoto mission and its aftermath. First Lieutenant Rex Theodore Barber embodied a completely different archetype. The 25-year-old Oregon farm boy had studied engineering at Oregon State College before enlisting in September 1940. Where Lanfear sought glory, Barber pursued efficiency and technical precision. His methodical approach to aerial combat reflected his engineering background. Every maneuver was calculated based on aircraft performance parameters. Every shot was carefully aimed using mathematical principles of ballistics and relative motion. His confirmed aerial victories had been achieved through careful positioning and accurate gunnery rather than spectacular aerobatics. Barber's personal aircraft reflected his technical mindset. He had personally supervised maintenance procedures, verified weapon harmonization, and calculated optimal ammunition loads for different combat scenarios. His cockpit was organized with engineering precision, 009, every switch, gauge, and control positioned for maximum efficiency during high-stress combat situations. At 25 years old, he had developed the ability to visualize three-dimensional combat geometry with remarkable clarity. He could predict enemy aircraft movements based on their energy states, turning radii, and pilot behavior patterns. This analytical approach made him devastatingly effective in air-to-air combat, despite his modest demeanor. Across the Pacific at Rabaul, Admiral Yamamoto prepared for what would be his final inspection tour. The 59-year-old commander stood just 5 feet 3 inches tall, but carried himself with dignity befitting a samurai descendant. His left hand bore permanent evidence of combat, Rus, the index and middle fingers lost to Russian shrapnel at the Battle of Tsushima Strait in 1905 during the Russo-Japanese War. The injury had occurred when a gun turret exploded aboard the armored cruiser Nishin during the climactic naval battle that established Japan as a major world power. Young Ensign Yamamoto had continued fighting despite his wounds, earning recognition for courage under fire that would shape his entire career. The missing fingers never diminished his passion for calligraphy, his skill at poker, or his ability to command respect through sheer force of personality. During his time at Harvard University, Yamamoto had hitchhiked across America, working odd jobs and observing American society with fascination and growing concern. He witnessed automobile production in Detroit, oil refining in Texas, aircraft manufacturing in California. The experience convinced him that American industrial capacity was virtually unlimited once fully mobilized for war production. His famous assessment about running wild for 6 months reflected deep understanding of American capabilities rather than defeatist thinking. He knew Japan could achieve tactical victories through superior training and preparation, but sustained warfare against American industrial might was ultimately hopeless. This realistic assessment made him enemies among Japanese militarists who preferred spiritual explanations for inevitable victory. The admiral's mood had grown increasingly somber as the war progressed. Staff officers later testified that he seemed to sense approaching doom. His personal correspondence revealed growing pessimism about Japan's strategic situation. During a game of chess with Captain Yasuji Watanabe just days earlier, Yamamoto had made a prescient remark, "If I die before you, tell the Emperor that the Navy did not plan it this way from the beginning." The intelligence breakthrough had moved swiftly up the American command structure. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific forwarded the decoded message to Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet. From Pearl Harbor, it reached Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox in Washington through the most secure communication channels available. Multiple intelligence officers verified the message's authenticity through cross-referencing with other intercepted communications and comparing linguistic patterns with known Japanese naval traffic. The precision and detail suggested legitimate operational planning rather than deception or misinformation. Japanese punctuality and attention to scheduling details made the intelligence particularly credible. According to multiple sources, President Franklin Roosevelt's response was direct when briefed about the opportunity: "Get Yamamoto." Whether Roosevelt actually spoke those exact words remains disputed among historians, but the intent was unmistakable: eliminate Japan's most dangerous naval strategist through targeted military action. The decision required careful consideration of risks versus benefits. If the mission failed with heavy losses, it might reveal American code-breaking capabilities while achieving nothing. If publicity leaked prematurely, the Japanese might change their codes entirely, eliminating future intelligence advantages. Roosevelt and his advisors accepted these risks because Yamamoto represented a unique target whose abilities could not be replaced. The authorization chain descended rapidly through Pacific Command structure. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commander of South Pacific Forces, received preliminary planning orders on April 15th. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding air assets in the Solomons, began immediate tactical preparation with full knowledge that failure meant potential exposure of America's greatest intelligence advantage. Naval intelligence analysis suggested multiple factors favoring the mission. The date, April 18th, marked exactly 1 year since the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, providing symbolic significance. Weather forecasts indicated favorable conditions with scattered clouds and good visibility. Most critically, Japanese operational patterns showed no indication of increased security measures or suspicion about code compromise. On the evening of April 17th, 18 P-38 pilots gathered in the operations dugout at Henderson Field. The ramshackle briefing room, constructed from salvaged lumber and captured Japanese materials, had witnessed dozens of mission briefings. But none had carried stakes this enormous or required such precise execution across such extreme distances. Senior officers addressed the assembled aviators about the unprecedented mission profile. 18 fighters would be divided into specific roles based on aircraft condition and pilot experience. 4 aircraft, designated as the killer flight, would attack the bombers directly while the remaining 14 provided high cover against expected Japanese reinforcements from Kahili Airfield. The killer flight would consist of Captain Lanphier as flight leader, Lieutenant Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. 2 additional aircraft would serve as spares in case of mechanical failures during takeoff or early flight phases. The selection criteria emphasized combat experience, aircraft reliability, and fuel system integrity. Major Mitchell's navigation plan reflected both brilliance and desperation born from extensive overwater flying experience in the Solomon Islands theater. 5 precisely calculated legs across seemingly trackless ocean. Leg 1, magnetic heading 265 degrees for 55 minutes, covering 183 miles at altitudes between 30 and 50 feet above the waves. Each subsequent leg was timed and measured to avoid Japanese observation posts while compensating for predicted wind drift and magnetic compass deviation. Leg 2, heading 290 degrees for 27 minutes, covering 89 miles. Leg 3, heading 305 degrees for 38 minutes, covering 125 miles. Leg 4, heading 330 degrees for 16 minutes, covering 52 miles. Leg 5, heading 290 degrees for 21 minutes, covering 70 miles, while climbing to attack altitude. The navigation calculations required accounting for multiple variables that could doom the mission. Magnetic variation differed across the route. Wind patterns changed with altitude and geographical features. Fuel consumption varied with power settings, altitude, and aircraft loading. Even small errors in any calculation would compound over the 400-mile outbound leg. At Lakunai Airfield, near Rabaul, Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi supervised preparation of Betty Bomber No. 323 from the 705th Air Group. The aircraft had completed 47 combat missions without significant mechanical failure, FSL, an excellent reliability record that earned it selection for transporting the combined fleet commander. The Betty bomber represented both Japanese ingenuity and inherent compromises. Its exceptional range of 2,850 miles was achieved through minimal armor protection and lack of self-sealing fuel tanks. Maximum speed of 265 miles per hour at 19,685 feet provided reasonable performance, but the aircraft's vulnerability had earned it the grim nickname Hamaki, or cigar, among Japanese crews, a reference to its tendency to burst into flames when hit by enemy fire. Additional fuel tanks were installed in the bomb bay to ensure adequate reserves for the complete inspection circuit. A special seat was positioned behind the pilot to provide Yamamoto optimal viewing during aerial observation of base facilities and troop formations. A secure mounting was crafted for the Admiral's personal katana sword, a treasured family heirloom that accompanied him on all important missions. The escort fighters came from the elite 204th Air Group, whose pilots averaged over 500 combat hours each. Among them flew Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanagiya, a veteran of 100 missions who felt deeply honored to protect the combined fleet commander. These experienced aviators had earned their positions through demonstrated skill in aerial combat across multiple Pacific campaigns. The Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters possessed superior maneuverability to American aircraft at medium and low altitudes. Maximum speed of 336 miles per hour at 19,685 feet, combined with a climb rate of 3,100 feet per minute and turning radius of less than 1,000 feet, made them formidable opponents in close combat. But the Zero achieved these capabilities through radical weight reduction that created vulnerabilities. Empty weight of only 3,980 pounds, compared to the P-38's 12,780 pounds. No armor protection for the pilot beyond a single 55mm piece of bulletproof glass. No self-sealing fuel tanks, making the aircraft extremely vulnerable to incendiary ammunition. Structural strength calculated to absolute minimum requirements for weight savings. These experienced Zero pilots had faced P-38 Lightnings in numerous engagements throughout the Solomons campaign. They understood the American fighters' advantages: superior speed above 15,000 feet, devastating firepower, and structural strength that could absorb tremendous battle damage. But they also knew the Lightning's critical weaknesses that could be exploited through proper tactics. Below 15,000 feet, the P-38's turning radius exceeded the Zero's by a factor of 2 due to higher wing loading and weight. In close maneuvering combat at low altitude, Japanese fighters held decisive advantages if they could force turning engagements. The key was preventing American fighters from utilizing their speed and altitude advantages through careful tactical positioning. Meanwhile, at Henderson Field, ground crews worked through the night, preparing the American fighters under supervision of experienced maintenance personnel who understood that mechanical failure could mean death for pilots operating at extreme range over hostile waters. Master Sergeant Leo Godfrey supervised ammunition loading with meticulous attention to detail that could determine mission success or failure. Each P-38 carried 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns with 500 rounds each, plus one 20mm Hispano cannon with 150 shells. The concentrated firepower arrangement in the aircraft's nose eliminated convergence problems that plagued fighters with wing-mounted weapons, allowing devastating accuracy at all combat ranges. Ammunition belts were loaded with prescribed mixture of ball, armor-piercing, and incendiary rounds in 4:1:1 ratio, designed to maximize effectiveness against both aircraft structures and fuel systems. Rate of fire was 750 to 850 rounds per minute per machine gun, meaning maximum firing time of approximately 37 seconds before ammunition exhaustion. Drop tank attachments received special attention, because mechanical failure in a single shackle could force mission abortion or create fatal drag that would doom the aircraft. Each external tank was filled to absolute capacity, the larger tanks holding exactly 300 gallons, the smaller ones precisely 165 gallons. Fuel quality was verified to prevent engine problems during the critical mission phases. Oil levels were checked and topped off to maximum capacity. Hydraulic pressures were verified within specified limits. Control surfaces were inspected for full range of motion without binding or excessive play. Engine cowlings were secured with extra attention to fastener torque specifications. Every detail that could affect aircraft reliability received careful inspection by experienced maintenance personnel. At 07:25 local time on April 18th, the first P-38 began its takeoff roll from the Coral Dust airstrip at Henderson Field. The runway had witnessed hundreds of combat launches since the Marines captured the nearly completed Japanese airfield the previous August, but never 18 fighters carrying maximum fuel loads for a 1,000-mile mission into the heart of enemy-controlled airspace. Immediately, problems arose that threatened the entire operation. Lieutenant James McLanahan's aircraft suffered a blown tire during takeoff roll, causing the heavily loaded fighter to skid off the runway in a cloud of coral dust and debris. He escaped injury but was eliminated from the mission, reducing American strength by one precious aircraft. Lieutenant Joe Moore's fuel transfer pump failed during climb-out, preventing access to his drop tank fuel and forcing immediate return to base. The mechanical failure left him with only internal fuel, insufficient for the long overwater flight to the target area. 16 P-38 Lightnings continued toward their rendezvous with history, 2 fewer than originally planned and reducing the margin for success even further. Major Mitchell led the formation at precisely 30 to 50 feet above the Pacific swells to avoid detection by Japanese radar installations throughout the Northern Solomons. Salt spray coated windscreens within minutes of departure, requiring frequent clearing by pilots who needed maximum visibility for formation flying and navigation reference. Radio silence was absolute from departure until target contact, no communication that might alert Japanese listening posts to American fighters approaching from the south. Each pilot was alone with his thoughts, instruments, and the hypnotic drone of twin Allison engines that would carry them 400 miles across empty ocean to their appointment with Admiral Yamamoto. Each pilot fought his own battle against monotony and fatigue during over 2 hours of precise low-altitude formation flying. Constant throttle adjustments were required to maintain position relative to Mitchell's lead aircraft, while scanning engine instruments for signs of mechanical problems and avoiding spatial disorientation over endless ocean swells that could induce vertigo in unwary aviators. The tropical sun blazed through plexiglass canopies, turning cockpits into furnaces despite the cooling effects of slipstream air. Several pilots later reported fighting drowsiness through various techniques, from physical stimulation to vocal exercises, while maintaining the mental alertness essential for navigation and combat effectiveness. Lieutenant Roger Ames, flying in the cover formation, monitored his fuel consumption with growing concern as the mission progressed. The drag from his drop tanks exceeded engineering calculations, possibly due to improper attachment angles or manufacturing variations that increased fuel burn rates. At current consumption levels, he would have perhaps 5 minutes of reserve fuel upon return to Henderson Field, 2020, a dangerously narrow margin for survival. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. Burn too much fuel outbound and they wouldn't make it home. Conserve too much and they might lack power reserves for combat maneuvering against enemy fighters. Each pilot made continuous micro-adjustments to propeller pitch and throttle settings, balancing mission requirements against survival probability in calculations that could mean life or death. At 0600 Tokyo time, precisely on schedule, Yamamoto's 2-bomber formation departed Rabaul exactly as American intelligence had predicted. The Admiral wore his dress white uniform with full decorations, including the Order of the Chrysanthemum and the Order of the Golden Kite, intending to impress forward area troops with Imperial Navy prestige and boost morale through personal appearance. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff and closest friend, occupied Betty Bomber No. 326, along with several additional staff officers. The formation climbed steadily to 6,500 feet with escort Zeros, maintaining prescribed tactical positions, AC 1,500 feet higher, in two three-plane V formations that provided overlapping defensive coverage. Visibility was excellent with scattered cumulus clouds at 4,000 to 5,000 feet, providing occasional concealment opportunities. The flight from Rabaul to Balale had been completed dozens of times without incident by Japanese aircraft. American fighters had never penetrated this far north in strength, and the greatest anticipated danger seemed to be operational accidents rather than enemy interception. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanagiya, flying escort in 0 No. 3081, scanned the sky in prescribed patterns drilled into him through years of combat training. 3 years of aerial warfare had developed his visual skills and tactical instincts to near supernatural levels. He could identify aircraft types at distances where other pilots saw only specks against cloud backgrounds. His peripheral vision could detect the slightest movement against varied backgrounds through techniques learned in dozens of life-or-death encounters. Yet, on this morning, his attention focused primarily on maintaining precise formation position relative to the bombers. The routine nature of the flight, combined with complete absence of previous American interference, created a false sense of security that would prove fatal. At 0934 local time, after flying exactly 410 miles by dead-reckoning navigation across trackless ocean, Mitchell's formation reached their calculated intercept point on schedule with navigation accuracy that bordered on miraculous. The Major checked his specially synchronized watch against his navigation plot, knowing that timing was critical to mission success. If his calculations were correct, enemy aircraft should appear within minutes at their 11 o'clock position at higher altitude. If he had made any error in wind calculation, compass heading, or time distance calculations, they would miss the target entirely with insufficient fuel to search the vast Pacific for Japanese aircraft that might be anywhere within hundreds of square miles of ocean. First Lieutenant Douglas Canning, flying as Mitchell's wingman, possessed exceptional eyesight that had earned him the nickname Eagle Eyes among squadron pilots. His visual acuity, combined with years of experience identifying aircraft at maximum detection ranges, made him invaluable for target acquisition in the crucial moments when split-second decisions determined mission success or failure. Scanning the horizon at their 11 o'clock position, Canning spotted distant specks against scattered clouds that resolved into aircraft formations as range decreased. The silhouettes matched intelligence descriptions of Betty bombers and Zero escorts exactly as briefed during mission planning sessions. Bogies, 11 o'clock high, Canning called over the radio, breaking the 2-hour silence for the first time since departure from Henderson Field. The range was approximately 5 miles, with an altitude differential of 6,000 feet separating the American and Japanese formations. 8 aircraft in perfect formation, XPTs, exactly where American intelligence had predicted they would be based on decoded message traffic. 2 Betty bombers in loose echelon formation with 6 Zero fighters maintaining escort positions in 2 three-plane elements. Mitchell felt a surge of amazement mixed with professional satisfaction. They had achieved the seemingly impossible, finding the proverbial needle in a Pacific haystack through navigation precision, intelligence accuracy, and timing that required every element to function perfectly. Admiral Yamamoto was within range of American guns for the first and only time in the war. "Skin your tanks, all flights," Mitchell ordered over the radio. "Let's get them." 165-gallon and 300-gallon external fuel tanks tumbled toward the ocean as 16 P-38 Lightnings shed their drag-inducing burden in preparation for combat. The jettisoned tanks represented hundreds of gallons of precious fuel, but their weight and drag would prevent effective maneuvering against enemy fighters. Allison engines were pushed to war emergency power settings, delivering 1,425 horsepower per engine and transforming the Lightnings into the fastest fighters in the Pacific Theater. The formation accelerated through 300 miles per hour while climbing at maximum sustainable rate toward combat altitude. Captain Lanphier made an instant tactical decision that would generate decades of controversy among historians and surviving mission participants. Instead of continuing toward the bombers with the killer flight as briefed, he turned to engage the diving Zero escorts in head-on combat. His stated reasoning: eliminate the escort threat to allow cleaner attacks on the primary targets. Critics would later argue that Lanphier was glory hunting, seeking easier fighter victories over the primary objective of killing Yamamoto. The truth probably lay somewhere between tactical necessity and personal ambition, complicated by the split-second nature of aerial combat decisions that left little time for careful consideration of alternatives. Lieutenant Barber maintained his assigned course toward the bombers, which were now diving desperately toward the jungle canopy in evasive action. The lead Betty's pilot was attempting to reach treetop level, where the P-38's speed advantage would be minimized, and dense jungle vegetation would provide concealment from further attacks. Standard Japanese bomber defensive doctrine called for immediate evasive action when intercepted, relying on escort fighters to drive off attackers, while transport aircraft escaped through speed and maneuverability at low altitude. The Betty's superior knowledge of local terrain provided additional advantages for pilots familiar with escape routes through mountain valleys and jungle corridors. Barber pushed his Lightning into a 45-degree dive, airspeed indicator climbing rapidly past 400 miles per hour as he closed distance with the fleeing bomber. The P-38's structural strength allowed dive speeds that would destroy lighter aircraft, providing crucial advantages in pursuit situations against enemy bombers attempting escape through violent maneuvering. The distance closed rapidly. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. At 500 yards range, Barber opened fire with all weapons, 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, creating a convergent zone of destruction that could shatter any aircraft within its lethal envelope. 4 streams of 50-caliber bullets and 20mm cannon shells converged on the bomber's right engine and wing root with devastating accuracy. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Betty's right engine exploded in orange flames as cannon shells ruptured fuel lines and ignited aviation gasoline. The wing spar was severed by concentrated machine gun fire that cut through aluminum structure like a saw. The bomber rolled violently to the left, completely out of control as its damaged wing could no longer provide lift. Barber pulled up hard to avoid collision with the disintegrating aircraft, his P-38 groaning under G-forces that pushed him deep into his seat. Through his rearview mirror, he glimpsed the Betty's fuselage disappearing into jungle canopy, trailing fire and debris in a death spiral that carried Admiral Yamamoto to his fate. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Besby Holmes had spotted the second bomber low over water near Moila Point, racing south along the Bougainville coastline at maximum speed in desperate attempt to escape the American ambush. Vice Admiral Ugaki's pilot had chosen ocean escape over jungle concealment, hoping to use the water's surface to prevent attacks from below, while maintaining maximum speed toward friendly territory. Holmes rolled into attack position, but his closure rate was excessive due to the high-speed pursuit geometry that left little time for careful gunnery. He fired a long burst that damaged the Betty's right engine, producing white vapor trails of leaking fuel and coolant, but overshot the target before achieving decisive damage due to his aircraft's superior speed. The damaged bomber continued southward along the coastline, trailing smoke and losing altitude steadily as its wounded engine struggled to maintain power. Holmes had inflicted significant damage, but the Betty remained airborne and capable of reaching friendly territory if not intercepted by other American fighters in the area. Barber acquired the second bomber after Holmes's attack, positioning his Lightning for a deflection shot against the low-flying target. The damaged Betty was barely 50 feet above the ocean waves, its pilot using ground effect to maintain altitude despite engine damage that reduced available power significantly. Barber lined up for a carefully calculated deflection shot, leading the target to account for its forward speed and predicting its flight path based on damage assessment and pilot behavior. His engineering background provided intuitive understanding of ballistics and relative motion that made him devastatingly accurate in air-to-air gunnery. His burst walked across the water in towering geysers of spray before climbing into the bomber's fuselage behind the cockpit area. Large metal fragments peeled away from the aircraft's structure, some striking Barber's P-38 with audible impacts that testified to the destructive power of his concentrated firepower. The Betty's left engine caught fire as incendiary rounds ignited fuel vapors in the engine compartment. Both engines were now damaged or destroyed, leaving the aircraft without sufficient power to maintain flight. The pilot attempted a controlled water landing, but struck the ocean's surface at over 100 miles per hour. The aircraft broke apart on impact, as its relatively weak structure could not withstand the tremendous forces involved. The fuselage separated from the wings in a shower of debris and aviation fuel that spread across the water's surface. Admiral Ugaki and 2 staff officers would survive the crash with serious injuries and later rescue, but their testimony would confirm the devastating effectiveness of the American attack. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes from initial contact to final destruction of both Japanese bombers. Time over target was perhaps 3 minutes of actual combat, a brief but decisive action that eliminated Japan's most important naval strategist and several key staff officers in one coordinated attack. As quickly as it had begun, the aerial battle ended with 2 Japanese bombers destroyed, their wreckage scattered across jungle and ocean. Smoke columns marked the destruction sites, providing grim testimony to American firepower and tactical effectiveness. But the return flight would test every pilot's endurance and skill over 400 miles of hostile ocean. Lieutenant Barber's P-38 had sustained significant battle damage during the engagement. His aircraft bore 104 bullet holes from return fire by the bomber's defensive gunners and possibly 0 fighters that had engaged during the chaotic combat sequence. The damage testament to the intensity of Japanese resistance during those crucial minutes. Hydraulic fluid leaked from punctured lines, leaving reddish streaks along the fuselage that marked the path of enemy bullets through vital aircraft systems. One engine ran rough, possibly from debris ingestion or battle damage sustained during low-level attacks, but both Allison engines continued to function adequately for the long flight home. The Lightning remained controllable despite extensive damage, though Barber began the return journey constantly monitoring engine temperatures, oil pressures, and fuel consumption rates. Every unusual vibration or sound might signal impending engine failure over 400 miles of shark-infested ocean, where survival chances were minimal. The return flight tested every pilot's endurance and navigational skill as they faced the prospect of flying 400 miles across open ocean with critically low fuel reserves and possible mechanical problems. Several aircraft had sustained battle damage, and fuel gauges showed dangerously low levels for the long overwater journey back to Henderson Field. Lieutenant Holmes experienced engine problems that forced him to reduce power settings, falling behind the main formation as his damaged aircraft struggled to maintain cruise speed. Rather than risk the formation's safety by slowing everyone down, he accepted the increased danger of flying alone across hostile waters with uncertain mechanical reliability. Radio discipline was maintained despite the temptation to coordinate mutual support or call for emergency assistance. Each pilot remained alone with his calculations, estimating whether remaining fuel would carry him home or leave him swimming in Pacific waters, where rescue was uncertain and Japanese submarines patrolled regularly. As they approached the Russell Islands, approximately 200 miles from Henderson Field, several pilots faced critical decisions about fuel management and emergency procedures. Lieutenant Raymond Hines' fuel gauges showed dangerously low levels that might not sustain flight to Guadalcanal, forcing him to consider emergency landing options. Rather than risk ditching at sea where survival was unlikely, Hines could attempt landing at the emergency airstrip on Banaka Island, but Japanese submarines had been reported in the area, and rescue operations were complicated by enemy activity and distance from major bases. The choice was between certain ditching and possible rescue versus uncertain landing with limited facilities. Tragically, Hines' P-38 would never return to Henderson Field or reach any emergency airstrip. Whether from battle damage, fuel exhaustion, or enemy action, his aircraft disappeared over hostile waters without trace. Lieutenant Raymond Hines became the mission's only American fatality, paying the ultimate price for the successful elimination of Admiral Yamamoto. Major Mitchell's navigation on the return leg proved equally precise to his outbound course, demonstrating professional competence that borders on artistic achievement. The scattered P-38s gradually reformed into loose formation as Henderson Field appeared exactly where Mitchell's calculations predicted after flying over 800 miles of open ocean navigation. Several aircraft landed with engines sputtering on fuel vapors, having consumed virtually every drop of aviation gasoline during the extended mission. Holmes touched down with less than 10 gallons remaining in his tanks, perhaps 3 minutes of flight time that represented the difference between successful mission completion and death at sea. The margin between triumph and disaster had been measured in gallons of gasoline and minutes of flight time, with multiple aircraft operating beyond their theoretical capabilities through careful fuel management and favorable weather conditions. Even minor variations in wind speed or direction could have doomed the entire operation. Japanese search parties located Admiral Yamamoto's crashed bomber the following morning in dense jungle approximately 4 miles inland from Moila Point near the village of Aku on Bougainville. The search was complicated by difficult terrain and the complete destruction of the aircraft, which had disintegrated upon impact with towering jungle trees. Yamamoto's body was discovered still strapped in his aircraft seat, thrown clear of the main wreckage during the crash sequence. Despite the violent impact, his body maintained a dignified posture that impressed even enemy searchers. His white-gloved hand still clutched his ceremonial katana sword, the treasured family heirloom that had accompanied him on his final mission. Medical examination revealed 2 gunshot wounds that had caused instantaneous death during the aerial attack. 1 bullet had entered below his left shoulder blade, traveling upward through his body and exiting above his right eye. Another bullet had struck his jaw, causing additional trauma. The angle and trajectory of the wounds matched perfectly with Barber's attack geometry from behind and below. The wounds provided forensic evidence that would later prove crucial in determining which American pilot had achieved the kill. Japanese autopsy results, combined with witness testimony from surviving Zero pilots, confirmed that Yamamoto had been killed by gunfire from behind and below, exactly consistent with Barber's straightforward stern attack rather than Lanfear's claimed overhead maneuver. The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel was devastating beyond calculation. Yamamoto had not been merely a fleet commander, but the embodiment of Japanese naval tradition, strategic thinking, and professional competence. His understanding of combined fleet operations was unmatched among Japanese admirals, and his loss created a leadership vacuum that could not be filled. Captain Yasuji Watanabe, one of Yamamoto's staff officers who survived the second bomber's water landing with severe injuries, later described the admiral's death as a void that could never be filled. Japanese morale, already shaken by defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal, suffered another crushing blow with the loss of their most respected and capable naval leader. Japanese naval intelligence immediately suspected American code-breaking capabilities had enabled the precise interception. The timing and location accuracy seemed impossible through coincidence or routine patrolling, but acknowledging code compromise would require admitting catastrophic intelligence failure that could affect ongoing operations throughout the Pacific. Instead, Japanese authorities developed cover stories claiming Yamamoto had died while directing forward combat operations, maintaining the fiction that his death occurred during routine military activity rather than targeted assassination based on intercepted communications. This deception protected Japanese pride while concealing the extent of American intelligence penetration. The dispute over who had shot down Admiral Yamamoto began immediately upon landing at Henderson Field and would embitter relationships among mission participants for decades. Captain Lanphier aggressively promoted his claim through official reports, medal citations, and magazine articles that portrayed him as the sole architect of Yamamoto's death. Lanphier's account required him to be in two places simultaneously, engaging Zero fighters while also attacking bombers through aerial maneuvers that violated basic principles of physics and aircraft performance. His version became increasingly elaborate over time, eventually describing a spectacular rolling inverted attack from above that contradicted all physical evidence and witness testimony. Lieutenant Barber's account remained consistent and modest throughout his life, a straightforward stern chase followed by systematic attacks on both Japanese bombers. His description matched physical evidence from the crash sites, Japanese witness testimony, and the forensic evidence from Yamamoto's autopsy results. The controversy escalated when Time magazine featured an article mentioning Lanphier by name in October 1943. The security breach infuriated Navy leadership because it nearly compromised operational secrecy about American code-breaking capabilities that provided ongoing advantages throughout the Pacific War. As punishment for the unauthorized publicity, Major Mitchell's nomination for the Medal of Honor was downgraded to the Navy Cross, despite his extraordinary navigation achievement that made the entire mission possible. This same award was subsequently presented to all killer flight pilots in a political compromise that satisfied no one while recognizing the mission's exceptional danger and importance. Surviving Japanese escort pilot Kenji Yanagiya provided crucial testimony when interviewed by American intelligence officers after the war. He confirmed that only one P-38 had attacked Yamamoto's bomber, approaching from behind and below exactly as Barber had described. No American fighter had performed the spectacular aerial acrobatics that Lanphier claimed in his various accounts. Historical analysis, conducted in 2003, after examining Japanese military records, crash site evidence, and surviving witness testimony, concluded definitively that Lieutenant Rex Barber alone was responsible for shooting down Admiral Yamamoto. The Air Force had officially credited both Lanphier and Barber with half-kills in 1991, but historical evidence overwhelmingly supports Barber's exclusive claim. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from Yamamoto's loss, or the broader strategic situation that his death symbolized. His successor, Admiral Minachi Koga, lacked Yamamoto's strategic vision, charismatic leadership, and realistic understanding of American capabilities. Koga would die in another aircraft accident less than 1 year later, in March 1944, dealing another devastating blow to Japanese naval command structure. The psychological impact extended far beyond immediate military implications. Yamamoto had been portrayed in Japanese propaganda as invincible, FTS, the supreme naval strategist who would lead Japan to inevitable victory over American industrial might through superior fighting spirit and tactical brilliance. His death shattered this carefully constructed mythology throughout Japanese military and civilian populations. If the seemingly untouchable Yamamoto could be hunted down and killed by American fighters, what did that suggest about Japan's ultimate prospects in the Pacific War? Morale throughout Japanese military forces began a steady decline that would accelerate with each subsequent defeat. American code-breaking capabilities continued, providing decisive intelligence advantages throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. The Japanese never fully acknowledged that their primary naval codes were compromised, making only incremental security improvements rather than the wholesale cryptographic changes that might have restored communications security. This intelligence blindness would cost Japan dearly in subsequent operations, particularly at the Philippine Sea, where American fighters decimated Japanese naval aviation in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The ability to read enemy intentions consistently transformed American defensive operations into carefully orchestrated ambushes that maximized Japanese losses while minimizing American casualties. The mission demonstrated unprecedented coordination between intelligence services, naval command, and Army aviation units that had historically competed for resources and recognition. Navy cryptographers had decoded the crucial message. Marine planners had provided initial tactical assessments. Army Air Force pilots had executed the actual interception with extraordinary skill and precision. This inter-service cooperation would influence American military doctrine development throughout the war's remainder and into the post-war period, proving that unified command structures could achieve remarkable results when properly coordinated toward common objectives rather than individual service goals. The P-38 Lightning's unique combination of range, firepower, and twin-engine reliability had proved absolutely decisive for Operation Vengeance success. No other American fighter aircraft could have executed this mission successfully due to the extreme range requirements and fuel consumption limitations that eliminated single-engine alternatives. The Lightning's concentrated nose-mounted armament achieved instant devastating effects that wing-mounted weapons could never match due to convergence problems and ballistic dispersion patterns. The 450 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon created a cone of destruction that could shatter any aircraft within its lethal envelope. These tactical lessons influenced the development of subsequent long-range escort fighters like the P-51D Mustang, which incorporated extended range capabilities with concentrated firepower arrangements. The concentrated firepower demonstrated at Bougainville shaped American fighter armament philosophy throughout the war and into the jet age. Admiral Yamamoto's death represented far more than the loss of one military commander, regardless of his exceptional abilities. His unique understanding of American industrial capabilities had provided Japan's only realistic strategic assessment of the war's likely outcome. He alone among Japanese military leaders truly grasped the implications of American industrial capacity and political determination once fully mobilized. His famous assessment about running wild for 6 months reflected deep understanding rather than defeatist thinking. Yamamoto knew Japan could achieve tactical victories through superior training, preparation, and initial surprise. But sustained warfare against unlimited American industrial production was ultimately hopeless, regardless of Japanese fighting spirit. His replacement by commanders who believed in spiritual superiority over material reality accelerated Japan's strategic collapse. The decisive naval engagement Yamamoto had sought, one climactic battle to destroy American carrier forces and force negotiated peace, would never occur due to American industrial capacity and tactical improvements. Instead, Japanese naval aviation died through attrition in increasingly desperate battles, where spiritual motivation proved insufficient against American technological advantages, superior pilot training, and overwhelming numerical superiority in aircraft production and replacement pilot programs. The timing of the operation held profound symbolic significance for both American and Japanese populations. April 18, 1943 marked exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, the first American attack on Japanese home territory that had demonstrated vulnerability despite geographical isolation. American fighters, striking at the heart of Japanese military leadership, demonstrated that no enemy commander was beyond reach, regardless of location, escort strength, or security measures. The psychological impact on Japanese leadership was profound, creating hesitation and uncertainty in strategic planning that would affect subsequent military operations. The mission revealed both the extraordinary capabilities and fundamental limitations of American fighter operations in the Pacific theater. The P-38's operational range had been pushed to absolute theoretical limits, with several aircraft returning with virtually empty fuel tanks after consuming every available drop of aviation gasoline. Had Yamamoto's flight been delayed by 30 minutes, or had weather conditions been less favorable, or had navigation errors occurred, the American fighters might have exhausted their fuel searching for targets across hundreds of square miles of empty ocean. The margin for success was measured in minutes and gallons rather than hours and substantial reserves. Operation Vengeance succeeded through an extraordinary synthesis of intelligence capability, technological superiority, and human skill operating at the very limits of possibility. Superior code-breaking had provided the crucial target intelligence. Long-range fighter aircraft had provided the necessary weapons platform. Precise navigation had provided the delivery system to find moving targets across vast ocean distances. But technology alone could never have guaranteed mission success without human expertise to employ these capabilities effectively under extreme operational conditions. Major Mitchell's navigation skills had found a moving target after 600 miles of dead reckoning flight across featureless ocean. Lieutenant Barber's marksmanship had achieved decisive hits during brief firing opportunities against maneuvering targets. Ground crew's dedication and technical competence had ensured aircraft reliability under extreme operational demands that pushed both men and machines beyond normal design limitations. The synthesis of these human and technological elements had created a capability that exceeded the sum of its individual components. The mission demonstrated that individual leadership could still matter decisively in industrialized warfare, despite the overwhelming importance of production capacity, technological advancement, and numerical superiority. That precise intelligence could enable surgical military strikes against specific targets, rather than the mass destruction that characterized most military operations. That technological superiority meant nothing without the human skills, training, and dedication necessary to employ advanced equipment effectively under combat conditions, where split-second decisions and technical precision determined success or failure. In those few minutes over Bougainville on April 18, 1943, 16 American pilots had fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory through a combination of skill, courage, and extraordinary fortune. They had flown to the very edge of mechanical and human endurance, fought a brief but decisive battle, and eliminated Japan's most irreplaceable military leader. The longest fighter interception mission in aviation history had achieved its primary objective through brilliant planning, superior technology, exceptional flying skills, and the kind of precise execution that required every element to function flawlessly. Weather conditions had been perfect, navigation had been flawless, combat execution had been devastatingly effective. Japan's naval strategy lay in ruins alongside Admiral Yamamoto's crashed bomber deep in Bougainville's jungle. The man who had warned against fighting America, who had delivered Pearl Harbor when ordered by his superiors, who alone understood that Japan could not win prolonged warfare against American industrial might, that irreplaceable strategic genius was gone forever. The age of precision military assassination had begun, proving that even in global industrial warfare involving millions of combatants and massive production capabilities, eliminating key individuals could still alter the fundamental course of historical events. Operation Vengeance had delivered exactly what its name promised: revenge for Pearl Harbor and elimination of Japan's most dangerous strategic mind. The Pacific War would continue for 28 more months with millions of additional casualties, but Japan's ultimate defeat was no longer in question. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death on April 18, 1943, marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese Empire's Pacific ambitions and its dreams of negotiated peace on favorable terms.